I'm here with Matt Biffa at Airedale in one of the smaller kind of nerve centres of your operation here, your lair.
Yes.
And today we're talking about the role of the music supervisor. We're going to dig in a little bit specifically to what your special skills in that area, but I'm aware that it's quite a big umbrella, isn't it? Can you just go through the basics of what that means, when we see the credits of a film, what's that person doing?
Well, that person basically is responsible for everything to do with music. So that's the score, that's the source music, the songs basically. Any on-camera performances, by which we mean people playing.
Sure, yeah.
And then basically on top of that, sort of getting to all the paperwork together, doing everybody's deals, musicians, composer, getting the licenses in for all the songs, reviewing them before passing them on to a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, but I've been doing it long enough now to sort of know the salient sort of bits. Yeah. And then delivering everything to the producer, who can then deliver it to the production company / distributor, and that also includes the music cue sheet. So it's a pretty wide thing.
Yeah, it's pretty much everything but the on-set catering, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've mentioned so many aspects of the business there. Yeah.
And there are different aspects of it that I particularly specialise in source music. I can do scores and all that kind of stuff as well, but I'm a little bit clunky at it. Right. Whereas there are other people who work here who are just complete experts. They can sort of walk into a recording studio and go, third oboe's a little bit sharp. And, score read and
just a bit late on bar 18.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And do we mean allegro in bar 26 and all this kind of stuff,
Followed by a sort of half-hour philosophical debate.
No, very quick discussion about sort of like
time is money.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's look a little bit towards your more kind of specialist area. How did you entered? I think fresh from a landfill site.
Yes. Yeah,
that was auspicious start.
Yeah, basically. So I didn't really have any ambitions to be a music supervisor. I didn't even know that there was such a thing when I started, and this was in the mid-90s. And but immediately before coming to work here, I was driving a dumper truck on a landfill site. I wasn't really very keen on it, and also not very good at it. And I was in my mid-20s. And so I resigned, and then back in those days you used to look in the Guardian media section or whatever, and there was an ad there for receptionists needed for busy music production company. And I thought, well, I don't know what that is, but it's got music in it. So, and I knew that I sort of wanted to get into that. Right. So I answered the ad. I got the job, and I sort of answered the phones for probably a year and a half, 2 years. Got the sandwiches, that, sort of learnt the ropes. And it was then that the head of production here realised that I knew quite a lot about music, but that was an inadvertent thing that wasn't actually deliberate on my part. No.
Are you one of those people that has quite an, can keep knowledge, has an encyclopedic sort of
only musical knowledge. Only musical knowledge. I can't really remember what I did yesterday, or who the Prime Minister of Venezuela is. No. Even if there is one.
You couldn't still operate a dumper truck then?
No. No. But I can retain facts about bass players in obscure mid-60s psychedelic rock bands.
Perfect. Yeah. This would clearly be a very short interview if the process of a film company saying, "Oh, we'd love to use that song in our film," went very smoothly. And I'm guessing that part of the reason your biography refers to you as a canny negotiator suggests that many a slip between cup and lip. Can you sort of just walk through the multiple decisions that go from a song being requested, if you like, to you being able to clear it? I mean, there's a lot of steps there.
Well, there are actually, and you don't know until you ask is the basic sort of rule of thumb, because there have been quite a few situations that I've been in there was one film I did where the director had written in a song, and he'd always intended that song to be at the climax of the film. What happens in the film is that the lead character sort of accidentally hangs himself.
Yeah.
Turns out that the writer of the song that he wanted to use had also committed suicide by hanging himself. So that was a straight denial.
Yeah.
And there's no coming back from that, because
that's already in the DNA of the script.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is that isn't a moral concern or a money thing, which are two things that often crop up. And it's not even, sometimes there are legal issues where you have two publishers that have a share in a song, and one of them says, well, we've got 75%, and the other one says, well, we've got 50%.
Yeah.
So
even my basic maths.
Yeah. I failed maths O level 5 times, but even I know that doesn't work out. So, there are disputes over ownership. But with something like that, and unfortunately, it took the director probably about 3 weeks to be in the frame of mind to actually accept even looking at another song. He was so furious that he wasn't able to have what he'd originally written.
Yeah. Well, actually, you bringing that up leads very nicely into something else I wanted to talk to you about, which is what you might call the sort of peril of the temp track, because that's a really good example of someone setting their heart on some music which in the end wasn't available.
Yeah.
And that we know as well is a process while films are being edited that music is used, and this becomes very magnetic. Do you have to work around that quite a lot?
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. It is really... temp love is a fearsome thing to have to deal with, frankly. Because what I found is that basically, if a song has been in for more than 2 weeks, you're
in the edit suite. So
in the edit suite, then you're basically sunk.
Right.
Because it's very difficult for people. What actually, in my experience, there's very rarely only one song that works to a particular scene. There are usually 2 or 3 that work just as well if you put yourself in that particular mindset. Even better, perhaps. But it's just getting people to get into that mindset. Yeah. And you sort of get yourself in situations where every day someone's asking you, but are you really sure that we can't afford this song? It's like, it's definitely going to be like $250,000 at least.
And I suspect certain artists have sort of regard their catalogue in a different way. I'm sure. I mean, I've heard anecdotally that people like Led Zeppelin are very tight about any usage.
Very tight.
Can you talk a little bit about the range of attitudes there?
Yeah. So on the one side, you've got Led Zepp.
Yeah.
And Metallica, the Beatles. I mean, Led Zepp are probably the most difficult, because once you start the process with Led Zepp, you kind of can't back out.
Right.
Like normally, what you can do is you can clear a song, and then sometimes the director will change his mind, or something will happen, and that song will get changed, or it'll be replaced by a score. And normally that's fine. You just say to the publisher and the record company, hey, they've changed their minds, and that's fine. But with Zepp, once that clearance is done, you are tied to that irrevocably.
Yeah.
And then there's other artists who you would think would be quite difficult, who actually are extremely open to quality filmmaking, regardless of what the budget is. Mm-hmm. Artists like Radiohead, for example, who have amazing management, who really sort of understand. And if a film is really good, then you can do a deal.
Sure.
Bob Dylan actually is not that difficult, because he's got an awesome manager. And we'll say, okay, I think this is really going to work for us. Stones are difficult. Beatles are very difficult.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because there's not a correlation between success. I mean, of all the artists you've mentioned there, perhaps none of them, you could argue, needs the extra money.
No.
So really they're looking at the project and saying, well, does this reflect well on us? Do we want to be in bed with it? And it's clear that there's a lot of different attitudes.
And then on the filmmaker's side, the big attitude is, well, we're going to be doing Metallica a real big favour by having Enter Sandman in our film. And unfortunately, that's not the band don't really see it that way, or a band like Metallica, you know, or that ilk probably wouldn't see it that way.
That's the sort of echo chamber of filmmaking, isn't it? You think you're doing everyone an amazing favour.
Yeah.
Has that situation got perhaps worse? Because I'm making an assumption here that budgets have shrunk over the times you've been in the business.
They certainly haven't grown.
Right. Okay.
They certainly haven't gone up.
Yeah.
No.
Are you constantly fighting surprise from filmmakers as to how much things cost and, you know, how music is valued in terms of finances?
Yeah, absolutely. And some of them get it. Yeah. You know, and that's, you know, and so that's fine. But I mean, it can be, you know, I mean, there are an awful lot of sort of like really clanging mistakes that filmmakers make. You know, things like, well, if you only use 3 seconds, you don't have to clear a song.
Oh, these urban myths about
these urban myths about music clearance and stuff like this. And a lot of things we get are sort of like, well, this song is in the public domain because it came out in 1936. Yeah. It's like, yeah, but the writer died in 72.
Yeah,
so that's not in the public domain.
Let's dig a little bit into that rather contractual area. There's a couple of things I'm really keen to learn a bit more about.
Yeah.
Well, a very often misunderstood concept is the difference between music publishing rights and what are called mechanical rights.
Yes.
I'm sure you've had to do it thousands of times in your career, but do you mind just giving us a quick walkthrough of why they're different and in what way they're different?
Yeah, okay. So basically, well, technically there's 3 sets of rights that you clear, but the two most important ones are, so you've got publishing and then master recording. So the master recording is the actual, you know, what used to be the physical product.
Yeah. Okay. The cassette,
the record, the CD.
How old I am.
Now the download.
Yeah.
So that is the performance of the artist, essentially. And then there is publishing, which is the dudes who sit down with the piano, the guitar, or whatever, with a piece of paper, and they actually write the song.
Yeah.
So that's the publishing. So
something you could buy on a sheet of music.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got to clear that, and you have to clear the master recording, and you would clear for the world in all media now known hereafter devised, including linear streaming.
Including the moon as well. Don't contracts have the moon?
Well, you can have the universe.
Right.
You're starting to get the universe, and we do that in perpetuity, so forever. But what happens is that sometimes you don't always have one entity owning for the world. And with older songs, there are things called the British reversionary territories, which is really complicated, which is like 5% of 20% of the world or something like that.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, I've done really, not recently, but I mean, when I first started, I sort of made really clanging mistakes where I'd only cleared a song for the world ex-US.
Oh, right.
And didn't realise that Warner Brothers owned.
Yeah, a certain punk song comes to mind.
Yeah.
Which you may or may not want to download.
Anarchy in the UK by the Sex Pistols.
So it certainly wasn't Anarchy in the US, or at least it...
No. And actually, and that was my first proper film.
Gosh.
And so I cleared Anarchy in the UK and Night Fever by the Bee Gees.
Yeah.
Amongst other things. And I didn't realise that I hadn't cleared the Sex Pistols master for the whole world.
Stressful night.
And I'd already well, it was a stressful fortnight.
Right.
Because the golden rule is you'll set a budget, okay, and you don't deviate from that budget. Or if you do deviate from that budget, you give everybody plenty of warning and say, look, I think they want 25 rather than 10. So, we might be 15 over. And then they can take a view and say, if they've got enough time, they go, right, okay, well, we'll try and find it.
Yeah.
But in this case, so basically it was about 2 weeks to the final mix. I'd told the producer that this is what it was going to cost.
Yeah.
And back in those days, we worked using fax and the telephone, and I had to spend literally 2 weeks sort of trying to get hold of someone at the film and TV department at Warner Brothers and speak to them and say, look, this is what's happened.
Yeah.
And they were fine with it, but I mean, it was, you know, that's the kind of mistake you only ever make once. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
I can see your canny negotiator status is earned.
Yeah, I had to do a lot of sort of, look, when I am in LA, I will buy you the mother of all meals kind of thing.
So the
just
the
be
catering
extra
budget
English.
suddenly went up well.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's very interesting. I mean, and before we leave this sort of murky contractual world, I mean, a couple of things. You touched on this idea of what I suppose some people call fair use. A bit of a mythology there. Yeah. Can you kind of put the record straight on that in terms of?
Well, the thing about fair use, fair use really only applies to documentaries. Right. Really. I mean, once again, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm sure there are other applications of fair use. But essentially, my understanding of it is that if you're doing a documentary, say, in fact, you're interviewing me, and then in the background a car drives past with Hey Jude blaring out of it, then technically there's nothing you can do to stop that.
Right, that's not a predetermined.
It's not a predetermined thing. So you could argue that is fair use. Yeah. You could also argue that you could stop the interview and then do it again. The rule of thumb is that basically you always have to clear music to picture.
However small amount, you know.
Yeah. Like there isn't like sort of like, you know, if there's more than 3 people in a room, then you have to clear it. It's basically you have to clear it.
It's amazing how these strange stories arise. I mean, does that make hip hop a particular challenge in terms of its own sampling and reference to other musics? Yeah,
because what happens with that is that you have to clear. So you have to clear the original. So let's say it is. Something by Public Enemy, for the sake of argument. Yeah. So you clear Public Enemy master, Public Enemy publishing, then you have to clear all the samples within that master, the masters of the samples and the publishing of the samples.
That's a lot of faxes.
Back in the day, you used to have sort of 3 folders. When we did Snatch, we had sort of 5 folders like that, full of faxes, full back and forth, and all that kind of stuff. A lot of staying behind till 11 at night.
It didn't go out. Yeah. It's a yes.
18 minutes a page. Yeah. You know, so hip hop can be very difficult actually.
And this notion of 70 years, we're used to sort of reciting that figure. Is that different in different territories? Are there variations?
Yeah. Actually, there is a slight variation on it, which is in France. Yeah. Because they don't count the 2 wars.
Wow, okay, so occupation.
Yeah. So basically you can have stuff that is in the public domain for the rest of the world but not in France, because their argument is that during the 2 wars no one was collecting income on behalf of the composer because they were fighting. So
interesting.
Yeah. So you just have to be aware of that. And then the third rights that you need to clear, which this sort of gets forgotten about, are the secondary musicians. You know, session musicians. So there's secondary musician payments, and those are either through the Musicians Union or the American Federation of Musicians. Yeah. So for example, A Day in the Life by the Beatles. Yeah. John, Paul, George, Ringo. Yeah. And the entire London Philharmonic. Okay. So the Beatles are signed to Parlophone Records, but the London Philharmonic aren't. They are, for all intents and purposes, session musicians. Yeah. So when you license a song, they then need to be paid.
Irrespective of the deal they signed at the time?
Because it's a union, you see.
Right, okay.
So what happens is that you can either sort of elect to clear those rights up front, so you can alert the AFM or the MU to the fact that you're trying to clear this song. Yeah. Or sometimes what happens is that producers basically just want to await claim, which means that someone might get in touch about it. Yeah.
So they're taking a little bit of a gamble there.
And then as an extension of that, there is a thing called you have to sort of check with SAG as well in America about session singers. Yeah. God. Because sometimes in the 70s, like Sylvester, for example, not only was he a recording artist in his own right, but he was a member of SAG. Yeah. Or SAG-AFTRA. And what that means is that SAG-AFTRA, expect him to be paid, the standard rate in addition to his sort of, his artist fee or whatever you would negotiate with the record company.
Before we sort of dive out of this back into what you might loosely call the sort of more creative aspects, there's something else that I'd be really keen to have explained, which is this rule whereby if, say, a publisher says, oh, well, we want, say, £10,000 for that, and another party, there's another interested party says, oh, we want 7, that it comes up to the 10.
Most favoured nations. Most favoured nations is the term. And what that means basically is that everybody gets the same. Right. So you could there are different sort of things with MFN as we call it.
Most favoured
nations, MFN.
Yeah. Funky.
Yeah. You can have MFN across the board. Yeah. So basically, what someone's saying is, we'll do a deal for £5,000, but everybody's got to get £5,000.
Yeah.
With the exception of opening and closing titles.
Okay.
Because opening and closing titles are always more expensive, and the way it was explained to me once is that you've got Bentley here, Minis in the middle.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And Bentley's not the same as the Minis, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
Always has been, always will be.
And then you get on a motorbike and drive over them and do a stunt.
Yeah, exactly. In a onesie.
Yeah.
So there's that. So basically you can do it across the board, and that's sometimes you have to do that if you've got quite a limited budget. The only way that really you can do it is to say, right, okay, we're going to do everything £2,000 aside. With the exception of opening and closing titles, and basically if we can't do that, then we'll just find something else.
Yeah.
Or the other thing that you do, which is more common, you avoid MFN across the board, and you just do MFN with the master recording.
Right. Yeah,
so the fee that you're asking for, let's say it's £2,500, is based on 100%. So because the other mistake that you can make is sort of where you've got like a copyright with multiple publishers.
Yeah.
You can say, right, we'll agree 2.5.
Yeah.
But then sometimes if you're not clear about that, then they can think, right, well, they're all getting 2.5.
Yeah.
So 2.5 based on 100%.
Yeah.
MFN with master recording, boom.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm sort of struggling to see outside of this very busy contractual world how you get time to do the other things I want to talk to you about, which is, let's do the obvious one. You must have to consume and appreciate and evaluate an awful lot of music.
Yeah.
And we talk a lot these days about the sort of democratization of creative music making. It's no longer locked away in big established studios.
Yeah.
So. There's an aspect of signal to noise. There's a lot more music around.
Yeah.
Has technology really changed your working practices in that regard?
Yes. I mean, when I started, what you did was, if you didn't have the CD or the cassette, what you did was you rung up BMG Records and asked them for a thing, and then the next day or later on that afternoon, a bike would turn up with a cassette.
Wow!
Okay. And then you'd sort of try it out on cassette. And so, I mean, can you imagine that? I mean, now it's just like you can listen to it on Apple Music, Spotify, or whatever, and at least you can sort of try it out to picture.
I read somewhere really interestingly you saying in an interview that, contrary to what people might imagine, now we have so much access to so much music. But ironically, you were saying quite recently, we want more catalogue. Now, is that because you're missing a certain quality of music? Is there a lot of? I mean, let's be blunt about it. Do you feel there's a lot of not very good music being made?
I think arguably there's too much music.
Yeah.
And the trouble is, you see, is that basically there aren't really any. There's a reduced number of gatekeepers, really. Mm-hmm. And you see, back in the day, whether they're the good old days or not, but back in the day, like if you were a musician, you had to, at the very least, have to understand how to operate a Fostex, 4-track.
Yeah.
And then you had to make your song available on CD or vinyl, and then you had to work out how to get it to people. So
these are like filters, aren't they?
So I mean, it was quite a difficult process,
Sure.
Whereas now, of course, you could just literally do something in an afternoon, get it out on YouTube or SoundCloud or whatever, and it's a little bit like, you know, on the X Factor, when you get those really terrible singers, and they're told that they're terrible, but they don't understand how bad they are because essentially they've got 35 of their mates at the Tackle and Divot on a Saturday night saying you're ace at karaoke, you know. So they're, you know, and then Simon Cowell's saying, "Look, I'm really sorry, you're shit," and they don't get it. And it's the same. It's the same with sort of bands sometimes. You know, they have a little fan base, and you hear bands sometimes they can sort of barely play in time. Yeah. There was one guy got in touch with me years ago, and he was sort of like, "Listen, I am a gold mine. I am." You know, the guy that discovers me is going to be a multi-millionaire. You know, I am as good as the Beatles. And I thought, all right, I'll give you a listen.
God, I admire their chutzpah.
Yeah. You know, and basically, so I listened to it, and the trouble, and he was trying to be Elliott Smith, but he actually could not play in time. And what I mean by that is that basically he'd sort of play a chord, and then you'd sort of hear him like literally pause and change his fingering, and then go on again. And he's one of the only people I've sort of written back to and said, listen, first of all, don't ever say you're as good as the Beatles. Secondly, you've got to be able to play in time, because otherwise you're absolutely sunk, you know. So but he got really offended.
To write back, you know, a lot of people would have just
Well, you know, I mean, but he was really upset with me.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't sort of fallen on the floor and sort of had a stroke over how his genius.
You know what? If you were in tune and in time, this would be amazing.
Yeah.
Takes me back, you know. It's like the Morecambe and Wise sketch, you know, all the right notes in the wrong order. Or whatever.
Exactly. Lots of that.
In an ideal world, you know, when do you want to be brought into a film, and when do you tend to get brought in?
Script. Script is best.
Yeah.
Failing that, just when they start editing.
Yeah.
So that to avoid temp love. So basically, what you want to be doing is that you want to be feeding the director a sort of grab bag of songs that you've sort of put together based on what he wants, what the budget is, what you know can clear, and all this kind of stuff. And then basically they will pick from that, and that sort of then avoids having to replace Imagine at the last minute. Do you know what I mean? And then there is the other time that you come in, which is sort of like basically when they're more or less finished the film.
Yeah.
And then it is quite difficult, because oftentimes you have to pick it all apart.
Yeah. I mean, you know, we mentioned this idea that, you know, there's an amazing alchemy that takes place when any sound gets put to picture, sound and music. But one thing I hadn't thought a lot about until, you know, thinking of chatting to you today is the added layer of decision making that goes on when you're putting something in that has lyrics. You know, I mean, I'm used to thinking about sound against picture, but so lyrics are resonating in perhaps useful or not so useful ways.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, I don't know if something like the tune that you used in Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Was it Oh
Children?
Yeah. I mean, is it worth talking a little bit about that particular film? Because I know it was quite dear to you, and it was a great success.
Yeah.
Can you talk through the choice of music in Harry Potter and the stories leading up to that song?
Yeah. So basically, what had happened was in 2005, I did Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, and in that we had Jarvis Cocker and Johnny and Philip from Radiohead, who appeared in this as this sort of wizarding band.
Wizard super band.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what happened then afterwards was that people would occasionally write to me and say, "Oh, it's like Billy Joe Armstrong from Green Day would love to, you know, if you're ever doing anything like that again, like, you know, he'd love to be involved." And then what happened was that so in the Deathly Hallows Part 1 there is there's a Weasley wedding, and at one point there was a band that you actually did sort of see on camera, and I sort of had a pretty outstanding band together for that. And then they said, well, we're not going to do that anymore, but there's this other scene that you should come in and talk to us about. So I sort of went in, and they said, right, Harry and Hermione have this dance, and here's the script. And they didn't really say too much other than you know, we don't want it, you know, there is this whole subtext to the dance, which is that at the end of it, they may or may not get off with each other.
Right.
And, you know, but you don't really want to signpost that too much. Originally in the script, Hermione had said it's a Muggle station.
Yeah, okay.
Which sort of made it quite wide, you know, because I mean, it could have been Radio 1, it could have been, you know. Yeah. But it wasn't Nick Grimshaw. Imagine that. Nick Grimshaw on Harry Potter playing One Direction. Well, that sort of never made it into the edit. So basically, you know, it's about that much on the page. Oh Children I came up with really quite quickly. I think it was actually the third or fourth song on the first CD.
Okay. On the first CD of your choices?
Yeah, of my choices. Yeah. And so you had to send 3 CDs in, one for David Barron, one for David Heyman, and one for David Yates, the 3 Davids. Okay. Two producers and the director. And then so basically part of that process was you sort of you have to sort of test what, and this goes for everything. You have to kind of test what does and doesn't work. And you're in a very specific world, in the Wizarding world, you know. And the thing about that is that, you know, is that we bring the world to you. Yeah. You know, you can't come to us, if you know what I mean. Yeah. And so basically, what that means is that you can put in certain things that will actually snap you out of that world, yeah. And bring it so. I mean, specifically. Otis, like Old Soul, will do that, weirdly. Yeah, yeah. Oasis will do that. Yeah. Any sort of, like, you know, well-known radio hit will do that, because you already have an association. Yeah, you've got baggage with it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You know, you can't have Layla, you know, or some Fleetwood Mac or something like that, because you know, it just takes you back to, you know, your wedding day or something. Yeah. It could be anything, couldn't it? Yeah, exactly. I mean, no, you know, so you kind of realise that there's that, and then so I did deliberately put in a few, you know, sort of clangers just to sort of. Interesting, yeah, just to test the waters. Yeah, just sort of test the waters. Because the other thing about Harry Potter specifically is that, you know, if something isn't quite right, then there are very reasoned and intelligent discussions about why something isn't working. Sure. You know. Yeah. You don't sort of get this kind of like, well, you know, you just don't understand. You know, it's sort of like, you know, we've hired you to do this job. Yeah. You know, just do what you have to, and then we'll talk about it, you know. Sure. So anyway, so after the 3 CDs, David Yates called me and he said, right, and I've still got the my piece of paper from that phone call, and he said, so I really like Oh Children, and I like it because of the, you know, the template and the you know, the tempo and the meter, and the fact that it's not too pointedly romantic, but it feels very timeless and all this kind of stuff. And all I want to know from you, his exact words were, all I want to know from you is there anything better than that? Right. Right? Okay. So I then spent another 6 CDs proving to him and myself that was the only thing that worked. Yeah. Now, in terms of lyrics, and I was talking to one of my little boys about this the other day, we actually got terrifically lucky on that song. Right. Because, and what I didn't realise at the time was, so at the end of the song, it's going like, you're talking about the train to the kingdom. Yeah. You know, and this process of elimination and all this kind of stuff, but specifically the train to the kingdom. Yeah. And of course, in part 2, Harry dies. Yeah. And he's in, you know, sort of, you know, whatever it is, purgatory or something like, which is a sort of King's Cross. Yeah. And Dumbledore says, I should think if you wanted to, you could board a train. And and yeah, you know, and Harry goes, but where would I go? And he goes, on. I wish I could say to you, oh yeah, planning up to that. Yeah, I knew it all, you know, and it was all, you know, but actually that was just a really, really lucky sort of thing that just happened to. There was just something about that whole song that just completely was right. And actually that's one of the only, I know I said earlier on that very rarely is only 1 or 2. Yeah. You know, there's only one song. Yeah, I can't. I mean, I know actually because there were 9 CDs worth of stuff, at the end of which I was really sort of floundering.
Yeah. We can't leave Harry Potter, or at least don't think we should leave Harry Potter without looking into the cautionary tale of the Weird Sisters.
Yeah.
Can you talk us through that?
Well, that you know, the old saying, where there's a hit, there's a writ. That's kind of that sort of writ large, really. There's this band called the Weird Sisters, spelt in the usual way, W-E-I-R-D. Mm-hmm. And so I was charged with sort of putting this band together, and we spoke to quite a few people about it, and one of the people we spoke to was Franz Ferdinand. And then the next day, or the day after that, there was something in the Daily Mirror, an article in the Daily Mirror basically saying that they were going to play this band of ugly sisters, because they always get it wrong, and that they were called the Weird Sisters, spelt W-Y-R-D, so in the Shakespearean way.
Okay, yeah. The Mirror got...
Yeah, so then what happens is that basically, is that everybody then, who ever referred to the band ever again, referred to the Daily Mirror article.
With a Y.
With a Y. Yeah. So from that moment on, the band was always referred to as the Weird Sisters, W-Y-R-D. Okay? Yeah. So it's a misprint on the part of a British tabloid. Okay?
Yeah.
And so what happened was that we were putting the band together, and then in the background, Warner Brothers were quietly going to every band that had similar names. There were bands called Three Weird Sisters, and all this kind of stuff, and basically sort of giving them money to sort of say, look, you know, we're putting this band together, you know, in Harry Potter, and you know, most people were like, that's great, thank you very much. But there is a band in Canada called the Weird Sisters, W-Y-R-D, which is a sort of female folk band, and what they said was that to this offer of money was essentially, fuck you. What's going to happen now is that every time people come and see our band, they're going to expect Jarvis Cocker and Johnny Greenwood and Phil Selway from Radiohead, right?
Yeah.
And Johnny and Phil said, well, that's ridiculous, because actually we intend to play in our real band, you know, which is called Radiohead, you know.
Yeah.
So there was never any plans really for the band to be anything very much than they might have played at something interesting. Yeah, you know, you might have been able to get them at an awards do or something like that, you know.
Yeah, okay.
And there was, in fact, everybody really wanted to do an album, an anthology of the Weird Sisters, which would have covered their career for about 300 years. So very much like the Beatles, they would have started off as a sort of, you know, very sort of basic sort of covers band or something like that, and then they would evolve over these sort of 2 or 3 centuries.
And we get this all on a CD.
Yeah, and be incredibly experimental. And you know, Jarvis wanted to work with Jack White and AC/DC and Motorhead. I think. I mean, whether or not we would have got those people is you know, another thing entirely. But that was the dream. And so anyway, so what happened was that the Weird Sisters said "fuck you," and then they sort of threatened to injunct the film in Canada, stop the film coming out in Canada, and they also wanted $40 million.
Oh right, okay.
Yeah,
that's an interesting kick.
Yeah. So what happened was that this was taken quite seriously, and so the screen time that the band had, which I think started off being about 40 seconds of actual screen time. Yeah. Which is about as much as you could have reasonably expected. Yeah. Sort of got cut down and then cut down again to, I think in the final film there's 4 seconds that they're actually on screen.
Right.
And then the rest of the time you just hear them. And then at one point they weren't even going to be on the DVD extras, because there was talk that one of the songs, "Do the Hippogriff," there was going to be, like, you know, the full length performance.
Yeah, sure.
And so there was talk that even wasn't going to happen, and I was really upset about it, because it was like a year and a half's work.
Yeah.
With all these incredible conversations about what do wizards sing about, and you know, how do you hear them?
Rock.
Yeah, wizard rock and all that kind of stuff. And in fact, there was one song, Jarvis wrote a song called "Supernatural Rock and Roll," and and so I rang up David Heyman. This is like, we spoke to Jarvis Cocker, and like 2 days afterwards, his manager rang up and said he's written 4 songs. Yeah. Do the Hippogriff, This Is the Night, Magic Works, and Supernatural Rock and Roll. I was like, amazing. Okay, so rang up David Heyman, and he said, well, you can't have Supernatural Rock and Roll because to a wizard it's natural.
Right.
Right.
Good point.
So Supernatural Rock and Roll, which I've still got the demo of somewhere, had to sort of like bite the dust, but the other 3 sort of made it. You know? Yeah. But it was a lot of work, and then for it to just sort of be swept aside because of this and this whole and it was a typo. And the thing is, in the film, the band weren't even referred to by name. In fact, they did actually revoice it so that on the DVD extra, it was, I think they called them the band that needs no introduction. But so it was all a typo, and then of course it got thrown out of court.
Okay.
So it went to trial, and the judge, I remember getting an email saying, the judge is furious.
Right.
And so the judge like literally threw it out of court and made them pay $80,000.
This is the band, the
band,
Canadian band.
Yeah. And it was, and then the lawyer that was representing them then sort of went on to sort of accuse 3 judges and the police department and the lawyers who were working for Warner Brothers of being in some sort of conspiracy.
Some sort of wizard.
Yeah, exactly. And she unfortunately ended up getting barred from practicing because she just essentially went rogue. Yeah.
Because of why?
Yeah, and it was a real shame because there were lots of things, really fun things that you could have done. A lot
of potential. Yeah. Speaking of kind of trends, if you like, I recently watched Peaky Blinders, and it was, again going back to Nick Cave, I suppose, and that's a very self-conscious use of what you might call sort of anachronistic music. Yeah. Is that something you're seeing a lot of?
Yeah. I think it's really good for Peaky Blinders. I think but I think, I sort of think in the same way as sort of like, if you've got a band like Radiohead, you really don't need 33 other Radioheads. Yeah. If you're going to be in a band, you should try and do your own thing. And I think really we don't really need any more PJ Harvey and Nick Cave on the telly, do we?
Should we have a little
We don't
ban
really
on
need to hear Royal Blood on every single trailer for something sort of sporty.
People are chasing similar ideas to get.
Yeah,
is that a lack of confidence that sometimes does that?
I mean, it's just sort of tried and tested, and so it happens actually creatively a lot with directors. They sometimes just won't accept something if it's not sort of like really quite well known. Yeah. I remember working on one film, and sort of the producer rang me every day, sort of going like, "Are you quite sure that we, it's like, it was like, I saw The Wrestler, and we've got to have some Led Zeppelin." Right. And I was just like, well, okay, well, it's going to be at least $250,000. And he was like, okay, well, we can't afford that. And then literally every day he would ring up and go like, are you sure we can't afford Kashmir? Right. I was like, listen, honestly, we can't afford it, Yeah. And so, and then he was like, well, can we afford The Who? Or can we, so it was just sort of going through, it had to be like a heritage,
hugely well known
marquee name. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. As opposed to something perhaps a braver choice of something lesser known or that has yet to be filled with all of that baggage and emotion.
And you see, actually, and I'm a big believer. I always have been a big believer in that approach. Yeah. I think part of the reason why I sort of keep coming back to catalogue. Yeah. Is it's all very well finding the next big thing and, sort of new artists and all this kind of stuff, and that's great. But, I've always believed that sort of new music is just music that you haven't heard yet. Yeah, yeah. And there's so much amazing stuff that isn't really tapped into. And people like, Thomas Golovich, who does Breaking Bad, I think has really sort of proven this point that it doesn't really matter what sort of decade a song comes from. If it's really good and really immediate, I think people actually, a lot of times, actually prefer something that isn't, well known.
Well, it's like we were saying earlier, songs that are very familiar to people, it's always a risky strategy because they'll have their own emotive connection to it, and it could represent an awful moment in their life or whatever. But actually, interesting, you talk about Breaking Bad and really fantastic supervision on that, I think, and also great score from Dave Porter. Yeah. So they're clearly sharing the screen time.
Yeah.
Does that mean that you often have to have, let's say, diplomatic conversations with composers who might want to tackle a scene where you're saying, actually, you know, a synced track would be better here? Is that an area that, again, that your canny negotiation skills come in?
I mean, sometimes it just isn't always clear what's right.
Okay.
You know, a song might be too heavy-handed. Yeah. You know, a bit of score might do the job better. Like on Fresh Meat, you know, we often sort of duke it out between sort of score and source, you know.
Okay, so you'll come in with a track, composer will have a cue.
And then we'll sort of sit down and sort of say, well, you know, what's better? And, you know, sometimes a song will win and sometimes score, you know. I mean, it's not really a sort of fight to the death. But, you know, because really we're all working on the same side, you know, which is to sort of help tell the director's story.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, I don't sort of sit there with a voodoo doll kind of thing, like he nicked my spot, you know.
I wanted that 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Producers and directors who clearly have long conversations with, and you know, there's the old saying that writing about music is like dancing about architecture.
Yes.
And certainly talking about music can also be quite hard. It's a very difficult thing to put into language. Do you often feel like a sort of expert translator in that role? You know, how well do you think producers and directors express their needs? I mean, when you talked about
really
Harry Potter, then
difficult.
it sounded like there were quite very articulate conversations.
Yes.
But there must be
I understand where I am with sort of like, you know, I like the tempo, I like the meter, I like the something that is timeless and classic.
Yeah.
You know, I know where I am with that kind of stuff.
Okay.
When people talk about music, they use their hands a lot because it's such a difficult thing to sort of express. You know, people sort of say things like, well, you know, we want something that's a bit urban but with a rural sort of feel.
Surprising but totally familiar.
Yeah,
sort of kind of area.
And it's sort of like, I have no idea what it is that you really want. Yeah. And actually half the time they don't understand what it is that they really want.
No.
And so
I know it when I hear it.
Yeah,
kind of
you know, and I think it's like anything. I think you have to be open to surprise, really, and I think half the time, and actually I've seen sort of Oscar-winning composers get thrown off gigs because of bad briefing on behalf of the producer and the director, where actually it just wasn't a very good, what they actually wanted or thought they wanted just wasn't a very good idea in the first place.
Right, okay.
And then rather than sort of admit that it wasn't a great idea, they sort of, you know, fire the composer and then get somebody else.
It goes back to something we referred to earlier, you know, the need for the already successful, and it's very hard to articulate what music is doing, isn't it? The language is very difficult for people who don't. I mean, it's not that they don't have training; it's just that it is it's a hard translation.
Yeah,
process,
you know, and actually, even when you put a song to picture, because it's so incredibly subjective, getting the tone right is a difficult thing in itself, you know, because, you know, you can sort of make a scene funnier or you can sort of get an extra meaning out of it that actually wasn't there, and that's fine if that's what's wanted, but other times it's sort of like, actually you're putting something onto this that I don't want expressed, or it's too funny, or it's too on the nose, or it's not on the nose enough. And sometimes, like in my mind, I'll sort of, you know, I'll be reading a script or something like that and I'll go, that's the thing. Yeah. You know, and then I'll say to the editor, right, that scene, that song started at about 32 seconds or whatever. Yeah. And that's the other thing actually, is that, you know, sometimes pitching a song, it can be you know, if you don't put it in the right place, it can make all the difference. It can be rejected. You know, sometimes if it's 45 seconds later,
it just hits the spot.
But if you like sat and played them the song from the intro, after 3 seconds they go, no, it's not right. It's like, okay, well,
there's quite a lot of psychology involved with that.
Yeah.
And in the old days when you had a cassette, it's not so easy to just quickly adjust a cue.
No.
Today, whereas now, slide it around.
You have to be really well prepared.
Yeah.
And actually, I mean, I'm still quite old school in that although I do it on a laptop, I still kind of press.
Yeah.
I don't sort of like lay a song on and then edit it myself, because I'm not really sort of very good at.
It's not how you think.
No, exactly. But back in the day, you had to be sort of really incredibly well prepared. But I wish I could say to you, I just look at it. I get it right every time. It's a really sort of long and arbitrary process.
Enormous playlists and whittling down.
And you sort of refer to the politics of it, and actually there is a sort of, in terms of sort of like presenting songs, I mean, what I always do is I sort of do 2 or 3 okay songs first. Yeah. Then I sort of slip in my 2 favourites in the middle. Yeah. And then hopefully we won't get to the
So
others,
they're like little lambs to the slaughter, those first 2.
Yeah. I've got to sacrifice a few pawns. Yeah. In order to sort of get to the main event. And then, but oftentimes, I'll sort of like, I go, I know you're going to love this.
And go.
And they'll go, what are you thinking? This is absolutely terrible.
And I mean, we all know that sound and post-production music is way down the chain of events on a film, and that can lead, I suspect, sometimes to, if they haven't got something in the can or a scene isn't doing what they need it to do, almost their last chance to rescue it is with music.
Yes.
Do you find yourself sometimes having to fill a scene with something that was missing with the music?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can rescue scenes. Yeah. I mean, actually, in an ideal world, I mean, I think actually there is arguably sort of too much music used in sort of productions and telly shows and films and stuff like this. I do think that there's an argument for less songs better chosen, but that's sort of contingent on the writing. The script writing being great and the performances being great, and there being some sort of flair in the But like, for example, sometimes the instinct is you'll have a scene, 2 people sitting in the living room or something like that, and the instinct is to put a song on in the background, and actually I think that kind of gets in the way of if it's really well written and really well acted. You don't want something just buzzing around in the background like a really annoying little bee. Do you know what I mean? You just want to sort of let that happen.
Well, I remember an interview with Mike Figgis where he talked about how, once you start putting music on, it's almost like this drug, that you and it's so powerful. And it really does steer a scene, and he was cautioning, perhaps in similar ways to what you were saying, don't overuse it. Once you start, you'll find it very hard to roll back. And I think reliance on it.
And I think directors have to feel confident in the scene, and say, right, this scene is good enough. This scene will stand on its own 2 feet with just the actors. You don't need me to kind of like,
put it on steroids.
Or to put up a great big sign just sort of Irving the Explainer. I always call it Irving the Explainer,
Brilliant. Please cry now.
Yeah, exactly.
Just touching back to 1 or 2 of your projects, was Snatch a happy ship for you to work on?
Yeah, well, that was sort of like, oh my God, this is. I remember sort of thinking, oh, well, it's a proper film.
Yeah.
Because it's like a proper director, and it's like, and it was very exciting and. About that, by and large, it was really good. It was a really good experience. I mean, there was a huge bit of temp love because there was Imagine over the scene where Brad Pitt's mum gets burnt in the caravan.
Oh, right, okay.
That was Imagine originally.
So you had to gently shift that out of the way.
Well, yeah, because there was no way we were going to get that.
Did it end up with Massive Attack?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, Massive Attack, Angel, which was completely different. that took a really long time. That was sort of like, it was a nice sort of collaboration really, because the guy would choose stuff, and then Neil, who works with Guy a lot and had done Lock, Stock, threw a few in the fire, and then we were throwing a few things in. And then me and my colleague were clearing them all. And I was sort of quite new to the clearance process, so I was so I was sort of very much sort of learning
the ropes of that.
And sort of and really sort of thinking on my feet and all this kind of stuff, you know.
Great.
And getting to know all the people in the film and TV departments, in the record companies and the publishers.
The machinery of it all.
And you know, and back then, you know, I mean, you could sort of go out for sort of quite long lunches. And stuff like that, or lunches that sort of lasted like a weekend. You
can pretty much kind of carbon date people, can't you, by the length of lunches?
I mean, now that's absolutely unheard of. But back then, you could sort of like disappear for 5 hours, and have a really good lunch, and just sort of and not talk about like films or music, just talk about, you know, life and how people are and all that kind of stuff. And I found out quite early on that that's often the best approach, really.
Sure.
You know?
I mean, you know, we're clearly talking, and we're going to be hosted on the Spitfire website, and you know, they're making these extraordinary instruments. They're making sounds available to all sorts of composers. Has what a producer or director expects by way of kind of pitch, if you like, do they now really expect, say, a full orchestral sound if that's on the cards already in the sort of pitching?
Yeah, pretty much. You can't really, you know, you can't sort of give a piano sketch now.
Say this will sound great when it's with the orchestra.
You know, I mean, actually, a long time ago, I know when Maggie started, people used to rock up to an agency with a ukulele.
Right.
And go, right, okay, I'm sort of thinking this. And that's, you know, also, right, we'll do this, and then, you know, you're going to get the strings in here, and people had to use their imagination. And that was happening all the time, a very high turnover of stuff.
But that's amazing, that sense that, you know, and you can imagine, you know, John Williams didn't exactly have to, you know, I mean, he could probably do it.
Sort of mock it up.
I mean, you mentioned that idea of imagination, that ability for people to kind of hear something and then imagine it either orchestrated or different in some way.
Yes.
Do you think that is a skill that might be weakening now that everything is there? I mean,
I think arguably it's sort of being lost in possibly the creative process as well, because, you know, back in the day, I suppose, I know I sound like a real old fart, constantly harking back to the past.
Get the man of fax machine.
Yeah, I know, exactly. But, you know, if you sort of wanted a sound, then I suppose you had to sort of work quite hard at sort of trying to translate what's in your head onto tape, and that's why, you know, you have these stories of sort of Public Enemy sort of running tape around the entire sort of studio, you know. And sort of you know, sort of whirling a microphone around, you know, in front of a speaker or something like that, you know, to try and come up with all these crazy sounds. Whereas now, you know, you just sort of, you know, press that, and, you know, and it's there. Technology is a good thing and a bad thing. I think technology is always best when it's sort of, but it's not used right, really. I think musically, anyway.
Well, I suppose if you're being led by the technology, and if the cart is before the horse, you can get to some tricky places.
But, you know, it just sort of like, I mean, if you remember sort of things like, you know, like when the Strokes first came out, it sort of sounded really quite shocking because it was so underwhelmingly lo-fi. You know, and sort of, you know, you're used to sort of like real, you know, high quality drums with great reverbs and sparkly, sort of shiny production. And there's this sort of very sort of lo-fi, snotty, small sound.
And suddenly we go back to those things, don't we? I mean, Under the Skin was an interesting example of a score that I think that must have surprised a lot of people, and it got a lot of attention because of that. This very kind of reduced, kind of slightly haunting, very simple thing, wasn't it? Just finally, the idea of the, again, sorry not to hark back to old-fashioned concepts, but the soundtrack album. You know, these days one can sort of build what you like in something like Spotify.
Yeah.
How was the soundtrack album a usefully separate entity to the film? This perhaps relates back to that old idea of some people saying, you know what, if film music is great on its own, it perhaps wasn't necessarily great film music, it should live with the film. Mm-hmm. Was soundtrack albums really their own shaped product, and has that world slightly changed?
I mean, basically, it's this thing of curation, isn't it? And it's so much easier now. You sort of alluded to Spotify and Apple Music and all that kind of stuff, where you can just basically sort of get everything at the drop of a hat. Yeah. And you can Shazam something on the Craig Charles Funk and Soul show. Yeah. And then that way be introduced to sort of like some quite amazing, obscure vintage funk or something like that. So it's much easier. So if you think, I suppose, like someone like, Quentin Tarantino is an excellent example of someone who sort of like essentially sort of curated some pretty awesome music for you.
Injected new life totally into them.
And all that kind of stuff. And now, like Jungle Boogie is completely ubiquitous.
Yeah, yeah.
Dick Dale is completely ubiquitous, but back then, only sad little anoraks like me and a few other people,
Johnny Trunk, etc.
Yeah, sort of knew about all that stuff. So it was so back then it was just an easy way of just sort of of being able to get that to people. I think arguably the soundtrack album has been sort of killed by Spotify and Apple because it is so easy to just sort of get stuff on the fly. Yeah. But what that means is that really for a soundtrack album to be successful now, there has to be exclusive content. Okay. So you have to get the idea, for example, on those Twilight movies, where you'd sort of get a brand new songs by Muse and Grizzly Bear and whoever, so stuff that you literally couldn't access anywhere other than the film. 50 Shades of Grey, and all that kind of stuff, know. So when that works, it's really good, and it's quite exciting, So I always think actually it's probably more exciting to do that stuff if you can get some sort of quite good collaborations going.
Yeah. Sure. Do you sometimes hear music that makes you think that has almost been devised to be so neutral that you sort of think, you know what, you're trying to get this used? Yes. Does that set you off?
I do, yeah. There's one song in particular, which I won't name, but which every time I hear it, it just makes me want to stab myself in the face.
And has it been used a lot?
Yeah, it's been used in commercials and all this kind of stuff. And you can just tell it's been written to sort of, try and get put on, to picture,
Right.
Because, if you want to do that, there are sort of various things that you can do. Anything with shining, or, anything that sort of refers to a collective experience, or anything that is sort of very we, will work very well. Beautiful days, that kind of thing.
Are we through the ukulele phase yet? Oh, sure.
Yeah, I think we're very much out of the ukulele phase, and we are still very much in the making an aggressive song, doing a sort of piano version of rock songs.
Yeah, that really gets to me. Actually.
Yeah.
Whatever the next phase is, I'm sure you'll be. I'm sure you'll be in charge of it. Matt.
Trying not to do it.
Yeah. Fantastic talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers.